Hi everyone, and welcome to the Generalist, where security practitioners look beyond niches, silos, and egos, and hopefully build their competence and credibility. My name is Ilya Umanskiy. So today I want to share with you a few thoughts on this issue that I've talked about multiple times, but it seems to me like a lot of pieces, a lot of groups in the industry are moving far beyond this conversation. They're not having that conversation. And because of that, it seems like it's almost like the game of doing the same thing and expecting a different result. I hear that phrase circulating a lot. And recently I also had an internal training with my colleagues, and we concentrated on this idea of what is an asset. And if you think about it, nothing can be done in protection, nothing substantive at least, if you don't know what you are protecting. Or in the sense, it might be a group of people or an individual that you're in charge of protecting. And yet, sometimes we don't even pay attention to the nuances of who are these people and these protectees of ours, and is there a difference between them in their profiles, if you will, in their lifestyles. And I don't want to dwell too much on protection of humans necessarily, but I just want to go back to this issue of why is it that we have so many frameworks, so many standards, and I've yet to see a single standard that says before you do anything else, you must have a granular understanding of what assets you are protecting. And here's why. I think that if you are able to define an asset, particularly from a perspective of how is it connected to the business objectives or objectives of an organization, it is so much more clear this connection between what this asset is, what its importance is to the actual performance of the business. And in many cases, the answer might be this asset is easily replaceable, and we don't need to dwell too much on protecting it should something occur, because it really is not going to hurt the organization significantly. So at the very minimum, though, you've closed that conversation. You have been able to identify an asset, and you've come to a realization that if you throw general scenarios of loss at this asset, it doesn't really hurt business objectives of the organization. Now, on the contrary, there are a lot of assets too that do cause significant and sometimes irreparable harm to organizations. We can see many examples of this in this realm of data protection, which has been flooded with many reports, especially in the last maybe 5-6 months, of a variety of compromises. Now those compromises happen not to some innocuous stuff. They happen to actual assets of the organization. In some cases, these assets could be computing systems, and those systems are compromised. And so the organization can't use those systems, right? In a lot of cases, those compromises affect sensitive proprietary data of the organization. And yet, every outcome of articles and discussions and everything points back to we need to do better. Well, I suggest that it's not so much doing better in inventing new, frameworks that folks should really think about, but it's really this understanding, granular understanding of what an asset is, how it affects the organization's objectives. And the simplest methodology that I can think about, and for you, those who are tuning in to think about, is as follows. Define an asset. What is an asset to your organization? Okay, and be very careful to check yourself multiple times so that you wouldn't miss some important parts of this definition. For example, you could say, well, our assets are people. Well, that's fine, but people have to perform physically in some environments, right? So it's not just people, it would be environments that support their performance, right? And those environments would be full of both physical features, designed elements, and also they would be full of technological features, right? So all of those things feed to performance that then is correlated with business objectives. That is understandable. What also needs to happen as the next step is, once you've identified what your assets are, or at the very minimum what mission critical assets are, because you can complete that exercise. You can look at those assets and say, well, some assets, if we lose them, that's fine, we can replace them. In my previous companies, it used to be called pens and pencils, if you will, the office supplies, right? Those are easily replaceable, but sometimes you'll find that lack of those supplies, particularly during crisis, does hurt operational capability. Nonetheless, moving on, you could basically develop a list of mission-critical assets, those assets that, if lost, really cause significant damage to the organization, to its reputation, to its operations, and to its financial capabilities. And so once you've done that second step of having identified the criticality of certain assets to business objectives along the three categories, like I said, operational, reputational, and financial, you can simply look at scenarios of loss for each of those assets. Now, not groups of assets, but each of those assets. And basically, scenarios can be developed today easily because there's so much available information on past incidents, and teams of practitioners can really be very, innovative in terms of thinking about different loss scenarios. And of course, there is a question of assigning probability to each individual loss scenario. And that's also very important. Sometimes we think of probability qualitatively, but in most cases you would be thinking about it quantitatively. There are fairly simple probability models that are out there, and I know that, for example, organizations like FAIR have been applying that. There are Monte Carlo simulations that some organizations have been using, but for different reasons. But in any case, those things are possible to quantify this probability of a loss scenario occurring against an asset. And so you can even stay at a qualitative level, to be honest with you. But moving forward, once you've applied those scenarios, it's important to understand how then the outcome of a scenario, let's say the worst outcome, or let's say a negative outcome, how that would affect the organization's objectives. And again, along the three categories, one is reputational, another one is operational, and the third one is financial. And once you've realized it, that builds a direct pathway to communicating with senior decision makers in the organization. You're able to demonstrate to them that if this asset is damaged or lost completely, it will cause the following operational, financial, and reputational ramifications, negative consequences for the organization. Recently, I had a conversation with a couple of auditors within a client's organization who, after I presented a risk management framework to them, they asked, well, how do we assign rankings to these types of losses? I said, you don't assign rankings, because those mean nothing to senior executives. Senior executives think in terms of dollars and cents. If you tell them that loss of a certain chunk of computing systems within your organizations, particularly those, let's say, that are responsible for administering your financial capability, right? If you lost those systems, right? The replacement cost, along with loss of productivity and others, can be quantified and can have a dollar figure associated. It doesn't have to be a perfect dollar figure, but I dare say that that dollar figure will be understandable and will cause appropriate reactions on the part of senior decision makers. And they will then have to say, well, if we lose so much through this incident, and you believe the probability is pretty high considering what's going on around us, right? How much is it going to cost to rectify, to mitigate, to prevent? So that same conversation in dollars and cents can continue. It's going to cost us this much, right, to mitigate the loss. And again, you don't have to go far. I mean, it seems like an organization like FAIR has already demonstrated this correlation, this very simple correlation, even though, unfortunately, a lot of practitioners somehow say that all of this is very complicated. I don't see this being complicated. It's just whether you're having the right conversations within your organization or with your client, and whether their conversation has the structure I'm suggesting. And I dare say that the structure does work. It creates, but builds your credibility in the eyes of the senior decision makers, and it makes them feel like they're not lost in exclusive lingo, because that's another thing that I've seen that happens very often, that unfortunately our conversations at the professional level, they carry us too far into the category of exclusive language. We use a lot of acronyms and words that mean nothing to business executives, okay? But if we switch to understandable language in dollars and cents, I think that they'll see right through your message. It'll be far more clear, and they'll respect you more for it, and open doors for you going forward, so that you don't have to struggle to get their time. So I think that instead of us having to ponder on, what's this next incident, and how do we begin to understand risks, and how do we use technologies, and how do we deal with talent management in our industry, I think that basic principle of looking at an asset or a series of assets and understanding them carefully, separating those that are less significant from those that are very significant and critical, applying loss scenarios, understanding probability of occurrence, and also assigning, the impact in terms of dollars and cents along the three categories of operational, reputational, and financial. and then having a conversation with senior executives and helping them understand that the cost of loss is this, and the mitigation is also expressed in dollars and cents. And then there's a healthy relationship between the magnitude of loss versus the actual mitigation. Then I think we'll see healthier relationships, both within our industry and also between us in our industry and senior decision makers and organizations that we're supporting. So I leave you with these thoughts. Please stay safe, and I always appreciate any commentary that you want to share back with me. Thank you.